What's your best explanation for why President Trump has seemed again and again and again to lean toward the Russians, to defend Vladimir Putin in cases when no one else would?
The facts are, it doesn't take a surreptitious recording. It doesn't take extreme investigative techniques. All you have to do is watch the president, watch what he does, listen to what he says, and you can't help but escape those questions. It seems hard to imagine it's a coincidence. I think more importantly, we've never seen this before.
Andrew McCabe, the fired acting FBI director, detailing what led him to launch a counterintelligence investigation into the President of the United States and Russia. As Russia's President Putin today, in his annual speech to the Russian parliament, today threatens to target the U.S. with new weapons systems if the U.S. deploys new missiles in Europe once the INF treaty is dead. Another 5 months or so. Joining me now to sort through all of this, MSNBC international affairs analyst and former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, and MSNBC political analyst Elise Jordan, a former National Security Council staff member in the George W. Bush White House. And still with us, MSNBC national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi, a former FBI assistant director in counterintelligence. Welcome all. Mike McFaul, first to you. President Putin's annual speech today to the Duma. Tell me what you draw out of it as the most important part. We're all focused on his threats. What do you think he's trying to accomplish?
Well, the most important part of the speech was all of the social benefits that he's promised to the Russian people. And he did that because he is falling in the polls there and quite considerably, and he needs to do something to shore up his electoral support and his popular support. But with respect to the United States, yeah, the threat, predictable, by the way. Of course, if we're going to deploy new missiles against them, he will deploy others against us. And he made that threat very explicit today as a way, I think, to try to preempt any discussion of deploying new American missiles in Europe and warning countries that might host them that there'll be consequences for their security as well.
Isn't he, in this threat, trying to take the advantage that, frankly, President Trump has given him? By canceling the INF treaty, the U.S. becomes the bad guy around the world. We're the arms, we're the ones launching a new arms race. What is the effect of this decision to back out of the arms control treaty rather than trying to fix it?
I just think it was a strategic mistake. And let's be clear, Russia was violating the INF treaty, although there was a dispute about that, but they were. But I think the prudent course would have been to put that information, declassify that information, have a public discussion of how Russia was violating it, and then get back to the treaty. By pulling out, as the Trump administration did, they've made us the problem. Andrea, you and I were just in Munich a few days ago, and what I was struck by at that meeting, the Munich Security Conference of European and American officials, is how everybody was talking about the rift in the transatlantic relationship. And there was hardly any discussion of threats from Russia or China. It was very striking to me. And the INF, pulling out of the INF, is a part of that narrative.
And Frank Figliuzzi, at the same time, we've got a president who is elevating Putin by this strategy and also being accused of being an asset by Andrew McCabe or an unwitting asset of the Russians.
Yeah, we're living in very perilous times. Ambassador McFaul referenced a strategic mistake. Let's look at that, and he's right, but let's look at that word strategy. What concerns me the most is when we have a president who's putting personal political interests over national interests. Is it possible that we're looking at an actual strategy of appearing to be tough on Russia, saying they're out of compliance with INF, we're going to pull out because they're out of compliance, and now we see Putin coming in and threatening us? Is this all for our purpose? Is this to appear tough on each other and further mask a relationship that they already have? Is this toughness all about a show and trying to show that we're really understanding a threat here from each other when perhaps they're not?
Well, your background is in counterintelligence, Elise, yours as well, in national security. What do you think is going on with Russia?
I found in this speech noteworthy, and Ambassador McFaul, please correct me if you read the full version and I didn't see this, that Putin chose to call out America's ruling elites for their posture towards Russia. He wasn't necessarily calling out Donald Trump. He was calling out people in national security circles who want a stronger stance. And he wasn't blaming Trump. He was blaming more so the blob, the foreign policy blob in D.C. It signaled a coziness that you wouldn't necessarily have seen Vladimir Putin hesitate from, say, his critique of President Obama.
What do you think about that, Ambassador McFaul?
Oh, I think that's absolutely right. That's a great observation. It's a pattern now that we've seen for a couple of years. Putin always talks about this deep state, the foreign policy elite. He's talking about me. He's talking about us when he says that. And it's a way for him to distance his relationship with President Trump. He's still holding out the idea that if he could just work with Trump, they could resolve these kinds of issues. And it's new. He didn't talk that way during the Obama administration.
Does this make you worry even more about that 2-hour meeting in Helsinki with no note takers, no American witnesses, and all these private phone calls apparently that take place?
Yes, I mean, for a couple of reasons. One, that's just not standard operating procedure. I worked 3 years at the White House. You always have a memorandum of those conversations to help your foreign policy team. But two, we've seen time and time again that when Trump and Putin get together, President Putin spins lies and disinformation that President Trump accepts. So we've heard that he thinks that North Korean missiles can't attack us. We've heard that people like me in Helsinki were involved in some cockamamie scheme to launder money out of Russia to help the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. We've heard crazy stories about how the Montenegrins are going to start World War III. All of that is Putin disinformation. And what's just shocking to me is that our President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States, parrots it. That's very troubling. And that, Andrea, is all the stuff that we do know. There's still a lot of things I'm sure they discussed that we haven't even heard about yet.
And here's Andrew McCabe talking to Willie Geist on Morning Joe today about what the suspicions were and why they opened an investigation into the relationship between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin.
Do you believe, as some have suggested, that the President of the United States is a Russian asset?
I can't sit here, Willie, and tell you that I believe that. What I can tell you is that I know we had good reason to open that investigation.
You know Andrew McCabe, and you've gone through all of this. What do you think about the predicate? Did they have good reason to open this investigation?
I think this is an important question, Andrea, because people need to understand that when McCabe says he opened a case, he ordered a case to be opened, we need to make a distinction between him protecting the already existing cases by inserting Trump's name at the head of a separate investigation. So people would be wrong to think that there weren't already well-predicated Russian counterintelligence investigations and mistake what McCabe is saying for saying, I opened the initial cases. He did not. And it's important to say that what he did was take steps to ensure that those cases were protected by adding 2 layers, an obstruction case on the president himself and a counterintelligence case on the president himself. To answer your shortly answer your question about whether those were properly predicated, indeed, I believe they were, and I think I would have done the same thing in his position.
In fact, the FBI investigation into Russia and counterintelligence had started during the campaign.
That's
in
right.
July of 2016, at least.
Indeed. So we're talking about simply layering the president's case on top of those cases as an insurance factor to ensure that if someone wanted to close all of those cases, they'd have to get through the assertion that they themselves were obstructing those cases.
Well, this is clearly going to be at the heart, as we know, as the heart of the Mueller investigation. Frank Puglisi, thank you so much, Elise Jordan, and Ambassador Mike McFaul. And tomorrow at